Dikru sir, would you mind coming on the dais? Are we short on the tumor board A? Yeah. Okay, there are two of them. That's, that's nice. So without wasting any further time, I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity. Now I have taken the liberty in this to go away from the concept, the way the whole theme in the conference is running, where we take a single patient, talk about the initial treatment, then talk about what happens at first relapse, then talk about what happens at second relapse. I think cisplatin unfit patients who need chemoradiation is very rarely discussed in any conference. And whenever I look at PubMed, I'm yet to find a single phase 3 study or even a single phase 2 randomized study specifically done in this setting. And we normally in such situations take the liberty and use data which is there in guidelines. We use data which is from our experience. And so I thought it is a nice time that we focus this time only on cisplatin unfit patients. So this is the first case. It's a case of CO oropharynx, a 51-year-old male, P16 negative, moderate differentiated squamous cell carcinoma, T3, N3B. Performance status was 1, BSA was 1.2, good hemoglobin albumin, creatinine is good. Let's take the creatinine clearance for the discussion is 75 in this. ECG was normal, no QTC prolongation. 2D echo was normal. Deep tendon reflexes were present and the viral markers were non-reactive. A PTA was done. The PTA suggests that this is CTCAE grade 3 type hearing loss. So this is the panel what I would want the panelists to restrict to. Panel A, let's keep, you can opine, but let's keep it in the relevance of that patients would be affording treatment from government scheme. Panel B, that the patient is middle class but self-paying, and panel C, he can afford everything under the roof. And my first question, and this would I would need to know from panel A, if you have a patient of CA oropharynx who's fit for chemoradiation, which amongst these things which you do for the patients in your routine practice? Anyone from panel A? Govind Babu, sir?
Yeah, I will not do an HPV biopsy, yes.
Okay.
Staging, yes, we will do. In the government scheme, both MRI and CT scan is allowed, so we can take either of that. Fitness, definitely. Echo, ECG. In fact, we in our hospital, we were doing MUGA, not echo. Okay. So that's also allowed under the scheme. Supportive care, yeah, very important. The nutrition, dental, speech and swallowing. This is an integral part that has been done in the hospital. So that goes on. And all this is done under the government scheme. So we don't need to bother.
Okay. Any other comment from?
If you are contemplating a TOR surgery or something in the oropharynx, we need to also do endoscopy beforehand. We think about contemplating a surgery in this particular case scenario. But in this, of course, MRI and CT would have been done and then the staging has been done.
Okay, I would not contemplate the surgery as the ORATOR 2 results are not that great. ORATOR 1 results didn't show a benefit. Tumor panel B, JP sir, this is a middle class patient and most of the middle class hospitals, you would require to pay for nutritionist visits, pay separately for the dental visits, pay separately for a speech swallowing visit. How important you think it's for that head and neck cancer patients who is locally advanced going for chemoradiation, these supportive care visits, sir?
So I think I will do all except that B. I'll replace it with PET CT. It was N3B, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's time now that we should, and HPV negative. So a baseline should be the cleaner one.
Okay. So you take nutrition, dental and speech.
They should be in integral part of any head neck treatment, be surgery, chemo, radiation, because QA, quality of life is so essential and we underdo it, I think, in India. I think we need to overemphasize now.
Okay. One more question for panel B, that we do it at baseline. How often during chemo radiation would you do it? Like how often? You say like after 3 weeks or every week, how often you would want your patients to visit the nutritionist, dentist and speech swallowing expert?
So it needs to be individualized. like a dental colleague will do a DMF index, see how much it can do, means what are the missing teeth, what are the filled teeth, what can be restored. And one more thing in the speech swallowing, I will add something, what is eating or not. So nutrition and speech goes hand in hand, and especially in a oropharynx, which is if trickling down, so they have a high risk of aspiration, silent aspiration. So I think we need to be on our toes in that. Any fever, we need to be very, very carefully evaluating those patients.
Okay. From the last panel, anything else would you want to do in this patient?
Not really. I agree with sir that yeah, we should do PET CT. And since I work in a private center, what sir was trying to say, what we have tried that try to do a package of nutrition, speech, swallow, and not dental. We can't do always because it requires some procedure. So we have tried that because it's a very good question you brought about, because that's the challenge for us. Because as a trainee, when you worked in TMH, it's easy, you refer. Yeah. It's difficult when you work in a private hospital, but we have tried that. So it is doable. But the nutritional screening, I have seen that the dietitians have a fixed protocol of calling them back. So they comply to that. The challenge becomes with the speech swallow. They meet in baseline. The follow-ups, most of the time they get symptomatic.
Okay. Anyone of the panel can take this. Anyone who sends such patients for early PALCAR or also for psycho-oncological assessment, do a distress or early PALCAR, this is T3, N3B patients. Do you think that needs to be done in this patient?
Yeah, of late we are doing this as a routine. The psycho-oncologist is a part of the MDT. And there's nutrition, dental, speech, swallowing, everything. Now we call it as prehabilitation. Yeah. So we group all that and every patient undergoes this.
Okay.
Yes, same for us. We have a clinical psychologist now. So he's running a protocol actually.
Yeah.
So
I'll bring Dr. JP sir here. JP sir, could you throw a light on the study which you did for distress assessments in locally advanced head and neck?
You are the part of that. You say it. Okay. So basically, we should do for many and all ideally. But ground realities are very difficult because our OPDs, even basic things are challenged in life. So we need to triage them. So what are the things? So there is something called NCCN scale for distress score. So which are above 40, okay, means they are really distressed either for finances, anxiety, pain. So in those, definitely we need an immediate resolution, and simultaneously on follow-up also we should be doing that. So in nutshell, they need it. We need to work how we have to do it in our system.
Okay.
Yeah, Vijay, I think this is very, very important because this can ultimately lead to whether the patient continues your treatment or not. So the complete outcome many times is based on this. Yeah. So I think it becomes very important.
Yeah, actually stole my words from my mouth. So in that study which we did, it was nearly 40% patients has actionable distress, and we did saw that patients who had NCCN distress thermometer score of 4 or more, in them there was higher incompliance. And if there is incompliance in head and neck cancer treatment, we know that going ahead, this would lead to a decrement in outcome. So it's important. The take-home message here is that not only looking at biopsy, staging workup, fitness workup, supportive care visits are equally important for head and neck cancers. And this supportive care should include a part of our psycho-oncologist assessments and assessments even from early PALCAR for pain control. Now, let me come to each of the panel and let me try from the panel A. So could you just enumerate what are your criteria for cisplatin ineligibility, and in your practice, what is the incidence of cisplatin ineligibility patients who are for chemoradiation?
So one of the thing is the renal parameters. So that is the most important one. Yeah. Other one is, as a baseline, we do the bilateral audiometry. So we see that as well. These two are the main things. Yeah. By and large, it is eyeballing the patient because in the OPD, that's what happens usually, other than these two. Yeah. And the cardiac function, of course, because you have to hydrate them.
Okay. I'll come to panel B. So there are some relative contraindications here, which would be like neuropathy grade 1 or a grade 2 dysfunctions with marrow, or for involuntary weight loss greater than 20%. Nandini, would you consider these patients who have this kind of relative contraindication, that is much of weight loss, some grade 1 neuropathy, or a Child-Pugh score of, let's say, early B, would you consider them as cisplatin ineligible?
So if the patient has no major renal function, is young and no other organ dysfunction, then only weight loss may not be absolute criteria to consider them as cisplatin ineligible, because a lot of these patients can be optimized before the RT starts. Usually we have a waiting period, so about 10 to 15 days, and we can try to recover. And many of them post-op lose weight and do gain weight by the time the RT starts. So probably I wouldn't say only weight loss, but if a patient had multiple things like weight loss as well as significant neuropathy, borderline creatinine, poor performance status together, all 3 to 4 relative contraindications, then maybe we would consider them as cisplatin
That's
ineligible.
very important, that what Govind Babu sir suggested, that when you look at create clearance, PTA, they stand as absolute cardiac functions. The rest are actually relative. Many a time post-operative patients, the performance status will be 2 or sometimes even 3 because the graft has been taken from the leg, or they have had a weight loss after that. So these should not be considered in isolation as contraindication for cisplatin, and you could actually overcome this by giving some therapy. Now, let me go to the last panel. Do you think when you roll eyeball on the contraindication, which are called absolute in this publication, and Dr. De Cruz was part of it, ECOG performance status 3 or Child-Pugh score C, do you think are they cisplatin ineligible, or they're as such ineligible for even radical radiation?
I would say that regarding the ECOG 3 or more, so we have to see, like, not always we are going to provide the patient a curative intent, most likely. And then we have to see, like we saw earlier, we discussed that regarding the other medical parameters as well. So I think choosing a correct palliative management also will depend upon so many other parameters other than ECOG. I think a PAL radiotherapy or a PAL chemo in some reduced form can be another option. That's my take on that.
Yeah, that's my take also. And I'll bring in Dr. Dr. De Cruz here. So why was this ECOG PS3 greater than 3 or Child-Pugh he said to be an absolute contradiction from chemoradiation? At least in our practice or majority of practice, we would consider that this is a contradiction for even for curative therapy in most of the patients.
I don't know. Now, are we doing a paper review and critique, or you want me to make a comment? I totally agree with your point.
Yeah.
It's just that sometimes as clinicians, we are heroic. I've seen, and yesterday I was on an equity panel, Choosing Wisely, where I made a point that in surgery, we are audited very carefully with a 3-week mortality. And if you have a mortality within 3 weeks, you're up on Thursday morning for rounds with all other departments criticizing. But when you do chemotherapy, if your patient dies within 12 weeks, which is a inclusion or an exclusion criteria, there's absolutely no audit. And I've seen this happen again and again. So your point is well taken, Vijay, that ECOG 3 probably palliative care, Poonam's point, and even not palliative chemo, maybe just best supportive care.
That's agreeable. So I'll come back to this panel. So if you have 10 patients walking in your OPD, how many you think would be cisplatin ineligible?
In our day-to-day practice, clinical practice, we see hardly less than 10% of the patients which are cisplatin absolute ineligible. Majority of the patients are cisplatin eligible as such. Some patients might be having borderline nutrition or borderline creatinine, but they eventually they do better with the due course of time.
Nandini, this panel?
So in our practice, around 25 to 30, I would say, a lot of them being otherwise fit, but with grade 3 thing picked up on PTA, then becoming cisplatin ineligible.
And Niranjan, or the?
Yeah, I think also 25% or so.
That's what we also see at Tata. And I was just discussing with Dr. De Cruz, and he also feels that this figure is around 1/3 of our patients. And that surprises me that when this figure is around 1/3 of our patients, why we don't have that much data in this situation to give a good guidance on this. And I want to get a comment from Dr. Govind Babu, sir. Sir, do you think that this cisplatin eligibility criteria, they are different for 3-weekly cisplatin of 100 milligram per meter square versus vice versa for 40 or 30 milligram per meter square? Would you just put some light on that?
So ideally it should be the same, but why we are tending towards weekly is because every week you're observing them, you're taking care of the parameters, you're able to judge how they're taking it and make dose adjustments or even skip that weekly dose. I think that way it is better. Otherwise the contraindications are very, very similar.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's point well taken, sir. So just to have a quick here that if there's age is higher, we know that this is from the McKinsey analysis that if the age goes above 70, the benefit of concurrent chemotherapy loses. If your patient's performance status is higher, performance is too, again, the benefit of concurrent chemotherapy loses. And this is a nice, normally whenever we talk about hearing loss, we just talk about the PTA. We don't talk about the age of the patients. And what this shows is that the same amount of hearing loss in an elderly may lead to a higher amount of loss subsequently with cisplatin, as opposed to in a young patients where the recoveries of the cochlear cells is much better. And we must understand that hearing loss, which we get after cisplatin, is irreversible and it's progressive with time. So it's important that these patients, when they come on their follow-up, you just don't check your PTS once, but you need to keep checking the PTS at regular interval. And because this loss most of the times happens in higher frequency, it's a simple history that whether the patient has difficulty in hearing or difficulty in communication is not going to serve the purpose. And this is the paper whenever I went across the literature for looking why this weight loss recommendation came, and this came on the basis of this paper in which they saw that if there was greater than 20% weight loss, which was at baseline, it led to a higher amount of treatment interruptions, infections, and to that, a higher mortality also in this group of patients. But I take the point which was made by panel B that if the patient has a weight loss, you need to put the patient on a good nutrition program, try to optimize it and see if the weight can be improved, especially in case of patients who have hypopharyngeal tumors, like post-cricoid females who come, they hardly have a weight of about 30 or 40 kg. So we now make sure that the case 1 patient is cisplatin ineligible. Now it's a radically treated patients. We want to go with radical intent. And what would be our options for treatment? And let's keep this option again in the remit of these resources which have been given for each panel. And this is a snapshot from Dr. Vermakon's recent review on how to treat cisplatin ineligible. And let me have thoughts from panel A that if this patient is cisplatin ineligible and if it's fitted with all other respect, and if it comes to you in OPD, what would be your options for him?
So in the government scheme, cisplatinum and carboplatin both are allowed. So if patient is eligible for cisplatin, what we generally do by and large is weekly cisplatin with radiation. The very few patients who we would give carboplatin instead of cisplatin, very small percentage.
Okay, so if it is cisplatin unfit, your option will be carboplatin, sir?
Again, it depends why the patient is unfit.
So in this situation, the patient is fit with all respect, only hearing is the issue.
Yeah.
So what would be the choice, sir?
Here, maybe carboplatin.
Okay, so sir would go for carboplatin. What would be the choices of panel B? Patient is self-paying.
So that depends on the reason for which the patient is ineligible.
Let's talk about this case, Nandini.
If it's hearing loss alone and otherwise the patient is young, no cardiac comorbidity and very fit, we could even consider carboplatin 5-FU if the patient has the logistics to get admitted and monitored. If the patient is, if there are other issues like logistic issues, and if it is not, then we less frequently use single agent carboplatin or partly carboplatin in some patients. But in a very fit young patient, I would prefer to use a more aggressive therapy like 5-FU carbo if I can monitor the patient.
Okay, so 5-FU carbo stands for you as the first. For if the patient has everything in the, and can afford anything, what would be the choice?
None of us in the group is a medical oncologist. So still then I would say that as a surgeon and moreover working in a government center, I would prefer carboplatin if it is patient is eligible for the over cetuximab.
Okay, let me pick up some medical oncologist. Nikhil, sir. Dr. Nikhil is here. Sir, patient is cisplatin unfit. He can afford everything. Base of tongue, radically, we want to treat radically. What would be your choice? Patient can afford anything.
So this is a cisplatin eligible patient,
He's
right?
cisplatin unfit patient, sir.
Unfit patient. What I do in my practice is I do definitely discuss about one is carboplatin, second is cetuximab.
Okay.
So I do use cetuximab in.
Okay. So if it is completely, if you can afford, cetuximab would be an option, which we would go with. But so would you mind joining the panel? So let's come to each of the, yes, sir.
So if we see the Vermeulen paper, so what are 1B?
Yeah.
So nobody discusses the last one, right?
Yeah.
And that is, if you really see, that was superior or marginally superior, let me put that.
Yeah.
And in oropharynx only,
Yes.
that was hyperfractionation.
In fact, I was waiting for you to comment on that.
Oh, really?
Yes.
So you are a radiation oncology first. Go ahead, you do it.
Okay. So we come to.
No, and second thing, just Vijay, I want to add. So nobody at that point of time, they added a IMRT and a sparing of the hearing organs.
Okay.
So at this time, we have that power, right? We should not let it deteriorate further, and we should use that modality also in that. And unfortunately, Vermeulen has not even documented that in his paper, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree with you, sir. If you make a decision that we are not going with radiosensitization and hyperfractionation would be, if RT alone is, which will be one of the choices, would be the preferred choice in these patients. Again, I'll come back to it. So saying that hyperfractionation is the choice, and I always hear in panels that hyperfractionation is choice, but practically, I have never seen patients being treated with hyperfractionation. Could you put light on that? Yes, sir.
So if the patient is payable, and if he's ready to pay double the cost, so the basic challenge of a hyperfractionation is you have to have space on the machine. Second is that the cost increases. Cost increases means the patient has to stay nearby. So the hyperfractionation studies were done when there was a dharamshala or the domiciliary system was there near the hospital, like in, let's say, Denmark or somewhere. And that was probably the key treatment in whole of the system. Because you do cisplat and you do other things, there's so many ups and downs which comes in that. But since people here have mastered that art also, so this art is now dying down. You don't have to do anything extra in that hyperfractionation, except that patient comes in the morning, comes in the evening, and there has to be 6 hours gap. That's it.
Sir, I'll have another. Even if it is not feasible to do the twice a daily fractionation, what would be your take on Overgaard's publications or Danka fractionation, where you would treat not from Monday to Friday, but from Monday to Saturday? At least give some benefit of, I would not say hyperfraction, but
that was accelerated.
Yeah, accelerated.
6 days. We also did that part in that study. See, the problem is in this group of patient, the accelerated repopulation, what happens will work with 6 days a week, or you do a Dahanka schedule. But here the challenge is node. Node were more hypoxic. They were not accelerated repopulation challenges. So you always had, if you see that same McKenzie or any other March meta-analysis, the control on the primary was exactly the same as in hyperfractionation or CTRT, but we failed at nodes. So if the nodes were not a challenge like in this patient, I think even 6 days week was a smart. So if it's a T3, N0, M0, any of the pharyngeal tumors or laryngeal tumor, supraglottic tumor, they were the best strategy.
Okay. So what we would see from the panel consensus here is that if you wanted to choose carboplatin 5, if there is cost is not a constraint, a cetuximab based regimen, and government setting a carboplatin with radiation. And if all of this is not feasible, we go with only with RT. And in that situation, the preferred mode, the way of delivering the RT should be an hyperfractionated schedule. If there was no node involved, Dr. JPS sir had suggested that we can even consider the Dhanka fractionation, which would be like 6 days a week fractionation. Now, my question to audience or anyone who, have you ever planned any other regimen than which are enlisted here? Any takers for paclitaxel, carboplatin, any takers for 5-FU hydroxyurea? Or let me say single agent docetaxel or single agent paclitaxel?
So Vijay,
Yeah.
There was a time when we had used weekly paclitaxel.
Okay.
This stems from the thought that this patient might not be eligible even for platinum as such.
Okay.
So I believe we had some published data also, some small case series also from Tata, I think in the form of some poster or something, if I don't remember, if I remember correctly. But we have used it and it was also quite tolerable.
Okay. 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 Yes, Tilak, you had to say.
So one of our patients who got 100 milligram per meter square of cisplatin, he went into severe AKI, creatinine went up to 4 or 5, and then he recovered with a borderline creatinine of 1.6. In that patient, we had used carboplatin paclitaxel because 5-FU also was some issue there. So we have used this in occasional patients.
Okay. Okay. So the reason why I asked you for 5-FU hydroxyurea, because in re-radiation setting, this is one regimen which has got level 1 evidence with respect to what got published in 2018 JCO, in which patients who underwent salvage surgery had already exposed to cisplatin. They were randomized to nothing versus re-radiation with 5-FU hydroxyurea. But we must remember that whenever you use 5-FU hydroxyurea, the radiation schedules which are used have a split course regimen. That means there's a gap between those radiation schedules, or else 5-FU hydroxyurea with conventional or with fractional regimen is quite a toxic regimen. We at Tata also have used in few patients weekly paclitaxel and carboplatin, which Nandini was alluding to, and even weekly paclitaxel and even weekly docetaxel in few of these patients. Now let me go to this case 2. This is a patient who's a gingival sulcus who has got operated. He has extranodal extension, 63 years. There's some 2D echo shows some jerky motions of the intraventricular septum. Rest is okay. There's around grade 2 hearing loss. But the DTPA GFR, which was done for this patient because his creatinine was high, showed that this is 38 ml per minute. Now, the first options which we discussed were when the patient was in a radical setting. Now, if the patient is cisplatin ineligible in an adjuvant setting, does the choices differ? And let me start from panel A. So what would be your choice in your routine practice in adjuvant setting if the patient is cisplatin ineligible? And let's take this patient in which it is because this GFR is 38 ml per minute.
Particularly in this patient, we would like to consider carboplatin as the patient is cisplatin ineligible, and there is no hope that patient will be eligible afterwards.
Yeah.
So absolute contraindication is there for cisplatin. So in our setting, we will definitely consider carboplatin.
Okay. Any
weekly regimen.
Any other choices which you do in the routine, or carboplatin is the choice?
Carboplatin is the choice.
Okay. We'll move on to panel B.
We also consider carboplatin single agent weekly.
Okay.
That's what.
Okay. Nandini, any difference of opinion there? Or your choices would be different?
If the patient was affording, in some patients, we have offered cetuximab, docetaxel, 1 or 2 patients based on phase 2 data. But in practical, most of the patients, if they can't take cisplatin, many times it is carboplatin alone.
Okay. Okay. Your patient actually is self-paying, so I'm not sure he would afford docetaxel, cetuximab.
Again, mostly I will use carboplatin in this patient. We have used cetuximab, but not something which is often done from our side.
Okay. Okay. So yes, sir.
Vijay, if I'm not in team A, then the option that I many times use is nimetuzumab.
Okay, that's good, sir. I wanted someone to at least give that option. Okay. In fact, the reason why I wanted someone to give that option is because there is a phase 3 study from India, and Govind Babu sir was a part of it, in which there was an arm of RT versus RT plus nimetuzumab, and we did show that RT plus nimetuzumab had benefit over RT alone. So that is also one option which this paper has not included. So now in the next 10 minutes, I would just run through what are the pros and cons of using each of these regimens, and what evidence do we have, and why this paper quotes about this evidence. And if anyone wants to stop me in between or ask any questions, you are welcome to do so. So we all know that the absolute benefit of using concurrent is around 0.81. And the only regimen which matches monoplatinum to that is the regimen of 5-FU-carboplatin. So 5-FU-carboplatin is another substitute for cisplatin. It's a regimen which is preferred by the Gore-Tex and the French. So if you look at the Gore-Tex studies which come from France, they won't have cisplatin as the #1 choice. The #1 choice for them stands as 5-FU and carboplatin, and carries a category 1 recommendation even to be used in cisplatin eligible patients, 5-FU carboplatin. But the question comes whether all these options, which are enlisted in multiple reviews, I just took one review of Dr. Varmakon because he's considered the leader in this setting, of whether these are actually eligible for cisplatin ineligible patients. Let's come to the option of carboplatin and 5-FU, which you would see given as the topmost option for both radical and adjuvant setting. And these are the studies which all are done from Gore-Tex group. And if you could look at the doses, the carboplatin here is dosed according to milligram per meter square. This is just for my younger colleagues and not according to AUC. And the 5-FU is, if you look at the doses, it can range from 600 milligram per meter square to 1000 milligram per meter square. If you look at the post trial in which the French have done it, this study was never done in cisplatin unfit patients. The study was done in cisplatin eligible patients, and always Gore-Tex trials have used carboplatin 5-FU in radical setting. Now, not a single time in post-operative setting. So the data of 5-FU carboplatin is more for cisplatin eligible patients and for patients who are in definitive settings. And it's not a surprise that cisplatin unfit patients, or patients who would come into the gamut of cisplatin unfit, that those that low to who have weight loss, or those in which the creatinine could be high, or those with poor performance status, were actually excluded from the study. Why is it's important to know this? Because even in cisplatin unfit patients, carboplatin 5-FU leads to a lot of mucositis. You could see there is a higher amount of mucositis, which comes to the tune of around 60%. A large amount of side effects, which require feeding tube and even lead to weight loss, which is seen in these patients. And one of the concerns which I have when we give carboplatin 5-FU regimens, especially in Indians, and this data from our own center, is that at least those patients who visit Tata, this is for neoadjuvant setting, and we do give DCF quite routinely in patients who are borderline resectable, and we do a DYPD mutation in all our patients. And this is the data of consecutive 118 patients. Subsequently, we have published data of consecutive 1,200 patients, and that number remains same. That is around 1/4 of our patients have DYPD mutations, which is heterozygous and would require some amount of dose reduction. This is the snapshot of the data, which is of higher patients. So my take on 5-FU carboplatin is, be very certain if you want to use this regimen. It can be used in fit patient who has only hearing loss as criteria. Using this regimen in very elderly patients, patients who have weight loss, patients who have compromised cardiac functions, or patients who have poor performance status, you are actually going to ask for trouble. This patient is unlikely to tolerate the regimen. If you look at the next grade 1 option, which has been, or level 1 option, which is higher option, which has been given, which Nandini alluded to, was docetaxel cetuximab. And this comes on the basis of RTOG study 0234. Randomized study, I'll take 5 minutes more. Randomized study in which the patients were randomized to radiation, cisplat, cetuximab. So patient got a combination of cisplatin and cetuximab versus radiation, docetaxel, cetuximab. So again, all the patients which were taking in the study were fit for cisplat. And you could see that not much difference in side effects was seen in this study. Interesting results of the study. The results, 230 odd patients. The study did show that docetaxel cetuximab had superior disease-free survival and overall survival over cisplat. In not very commonly quoted paper among medical oncologists, but And on that basis, this comes into the paradigm as one of the options for adjuvant patients. But remember, these patients are cisplatin fit patients. Again, an occasional patient which has hearing loss as a you can use this option, but using this option for poor performance status or patient with low creatinine clearance, you might be asking for trouble. This is one of the options which quite few of us use, which is cetuximab. Bonus study. Again, this study was never done for cisplatin unfit patients. Bonus was always done for cisplatin fit patients. This study, when got published, always claimed that there was no increase in side effects with cetuximab. But this is not what our experience has been at Tata. And this is the paper published by Dr. J.P. Agrawal sir himself, and which shows that cetuximab, when used in cisplatin unfit patients, actually leads to quite amount of side effects, a higher amount of rash, and is not that well tolerated in these patients. And that's the reason why in TMH, we have moved away from little bit away from using cetuximab, and we use in quite a few patients nimotuzumab as an option in these patients. As most of you suggested, single agent carboplatin, we also use single agent carboplatin in these patients. And this is our own experience of single agent carboplatin, which shows that this is pretty well tolerated. The problem is there's no evidence that carboplatin, even in cisplatin eligible group, could be beneficial. This was a Danish study, cisplatin patients randomized to RT versus RT plus carboplatin, absolutely no difference in outcomes. This is what the McKenzie analysis says, that most of the people do substitute with carboplatin, but there's no benefit which is seen with carboplatin even in cisplatin unfit patients. This is the data for nimotuzumab, particularly in the cisplatin unfit patients, which shows that nimotuzumab have a slight advantage in this patient, what Dr. Govind Babu sir was alluding to. This is an interesting study, came just this year, early quarter, which was using cetuximab, particularly in cisplatin unfit patient. Recruitment had to be stopped. If you read the conclusion, it clearly suggests that it is too toxic a regimen to be used in cisplatin unfit patients. We'll wait for the results of immunotherapy in this study, in this setting. Now, overcoming cisplatin unfitness, I won't go into detail. I wanted to talk on this. But so for me to conclude that this remains a very gray zone area, we need to use our experience and clinical judgment in this area. Simply extrapolating data from cisplatin eligible offer, because the paper or the review has been written by some greats in the field, we are not going to be safe, and we need to individualize treatment for every cisplatin unfit patients. I'd like to have comments from all tables, and then we'll move to for the experts' comments. So from your
Yeah, I think what you told was right. That is not evidence-based medicine, eminence-based medicine. Yeah. So I think we need to really see what our patients have and accordingly do it.
Okay, we need to see the ground realities. See, whatever we choose, the compliance is the end point. Means even the doses and the treatment time needs to be optimized. That's the bottom line. So to make a successful outcome.
Nikhil, any comments?
Yeah, I also agree that mental fitness is the most important thing. If patient is not ready and the timing is not maintained, no matter what you use as a combination, it won't work better. So treatment gap should be avoided. Optimization of supportive care, getting a tube in, getting nutrition in, making sure that the weight loss is not there for the patient during the treatment. And some patients, even if they have some parameters which are making them cisplatin eligible to begin with, you should give them a time of 1 week by the time the radiation is being planned and try to optimize them. A lot of patients can come into cisplatin eligibility.
Yeah.
Cisplatin is something what we have been using for a long time for most of our patients. Having said that, the choosing the right patient is also equally important. And we had troubles also with using sometimes high dose, the full dose cisplatin, what we had tried to use. But I think most of the centers, what Dr. Govind Babu also had mentioned, that it is quite challenging at times. So as of now, we are still sticking to the weekly schedule, and uncommonly we use carboplatin. Sometimes we use cetuximab, and of course, once in a while, nimotuzumab. So we have got options. We have to choose them wisely.
I would just add, whenever a patient is eligible for 3 weekly cisplatin, try and go for that.
Okay.
It's better.
So, last comments.
Great panel. I enjoyed the way you've prepared a full review of literature. It was a, what should I say, revision for me as well. And I thought great participation from all three teams. I'll quickly run through some practical points that I jotted down as you were speaking, because we are looking at equity, which is something dear to my heart as well now. JP made a compelling point that you have to do a metastatic workup when you have bulky nodes. And because we are talking about equity, I would have liked someone to say that PET need not always be done. There's enough evidence to show that a plain CECT of the chest in head and neck cancers may be as good as doing PET. So for youngsters in the audience, if you can't afford the PET, and many of us work in institutions that don't have a PET, our cities don't have a PET, Tier 2 cities, a plain CECT of the chest is good enough for metastatic workup. The second point about HPV, today we've just jumped onto the Caucasian bandwagon and do HPV for all oropharynx. You have to do it if you're publishing. You have to do if it's on trial. But in my practice, if a patient is a chronic tobacco chewer, alcoholic, no big cystic nodes, not a basaloid type, I may not push my patient to an HPV testing, particularly because we are resource constrained. The third point, and I thought a very valid point you made about supportive care and palliative care specialists, it's ideal. We all would want to do it, but we are all not working in premier institutions. And even if we are, we have time constraints, manpower constraints, and for others, patients have to pay. So in my practice, what I do is I only involve the nutritionist and the palliative care on a case-to-case basis. And I think JP again made that point. If a patient has significant weight loss before coming in, we'll go to the nutritionist. Otherwise, I try to involve the family. If the patient seems a little labile, I'd probably then call the palliative care specialist into, or the psycho-oncologist into the picture. Otherwise, I try to counsel myself. And again, because we are discussing resource constraints. Now, when you came onto cisplat ineligible, I would have loved you to make taken a poll from the panelists and the audience. Please remember, cisplatin is the treatment of choice when you're doing definitive therapy. In my practice, I still see a lot of people for cisplatin fit getting alternative regimes, including biologicals. And if I ask people to put hand on the heart, many people in this audience would be in the group giving biologicals. There's enough data to tell you that it has to be cisplatin. Vijay's discussion is if they cannot tolerate cisplatin. And I think that point has to be very, very strong when we treat our patients. I agree with you that 30% is a more pragmatic figure on cisplat ineligible. Now, when you see ineligible, triage, your patients come into two groups. Those that have absolute contraindication to cisplat, fighting fit patients, stone deaf like someone like me, or you have a sick patient who is more than 70 years sick. I think the sick patient and the point that Poonam responded to ECOG3 and all really doesn't come into the realm of the discussion. They won't be able to tolerate anything more. So it's really the cisplat ineligible because of cisplat toxicity that we need to do. So because they were ineligible, we use biologicals, but there are two trials, the de-escalate and the RTOG. These were in HPV positive patients where the Bonner data also was majority HPV positive, now showing no benefit of giving biologicals. So just reinforcing the point that I made. The weekly cisplat came out of convenience in our country. Everybody thought it will be less toxic. We just started giving it and we've all just implemented it. Though if you look at some data, probably at times, including the Amrita data in the post-op setting, it is more toxic than the 3-weekly. And we've done the 3-weekly on trials, the ERISA trial, the Lipatinib trial, where we were forced to give 3-weekly. It isn't too bad. but we have accepted again from the Tata Vanita Narona paper, please no 30 milligrams per meter squared. You're doing disservice to your patient if you go the weekly route. And he did show 40 milligrams per meter squared has to be the minimum that you would do. I'm going to end with, we all know that radiotherapy alone is inferior. You have to add something to radiotherapy. Whether you are adding a biological, whether you are adding carboplat, you are adding carboplat plus 5-FU, you are adding accelerated fractionation, accelerated plus CT, paclitaxel, hydroxyurea, anything. There's even a paper, and I was surprised you were quoting Danka so fast and furiously. There's something called Nimerzol, which is a hypoxic cell sensitizer. It's an anti-helminthic. It kind of died. At one time, JP and all was so excited to do it. I thought they'd come with the Nobel Prize into Tatas, but we never pursued that route. But now there's no data to tell us which is the best among this. There's just no data to tell us. And Vijay made a beautiful point that whatever we see is really not cisplat unfit patients. People have tried it off various regime, and then we pick up this data and we try to put it into our practice. But please remember, you have to do something more than radiotherapy. But radiotherapy is the most important, most important. Even if you give plain radiotherapy for a glottic cancer, you will cure 66% of patients. And this is old Harvard data, Princess Margaret data 30 years back. So don't try to add other treatment, break your radiotherapy, particularly in the post-operative period where your patients are sicker, and compromise, have delay in your radiotherapy. Please don't lose that. Add something else, but take your patients to completion of the prescribed dose of radiotherapy. That should be the crux when we treat out in community, when we treat out in daily practice. There were some other points, but the bell's ringing, food's ready, and I think we must call it a day. Thanks, Vijay. Great panel and wonderful participation from all three groups.
Yeah, thank you. I think we need more data on cisplatin unfit patients and maybe a need for a collaborative trial in this setting. Thank you.